A rich man refuses to help his struggling friend. Then life reverses. Leonard Morrissey first met Graham Turner in the back row of their 7th grade math class. Back then, both boys were far from the confident, self-assured men they'd later become. They were skinny, full of awkward laughter, and prone to whispering jokes about their teachers, mismatched socks, or the chalk dust that always clung to his sleeves. Despite their differences, Leonard was the sensitive daydreamer, while Graham was the practical thinker who excelled in problem-solving. They formed an inseparable bond. They spent afternoons in Leonard's backyard treehouse, conjuring elaborate imaginary worlds. Sometimes, after finishing homework, they'd pedal their bikes around the neighborhood until the street lights blinked on. And in those early teenage nights, they'd share secret confessions about their dreams for the future. Leonard wished to become a great novelist, weaving stories that could transport people anywhere. Graham talked of building a thriving business empire, convinced that mastery of numbers would lead to success. Neither fully understood how life might alter or affirm these wishes. They only knew they'd be each other's confidants in whatever tomorrow brought. By the time they graduated high school, life had started nudging them onto diverging paths. Leonard embraced the arts wholeheartedly, joined literary clubs, wrote short stories that sometimes won local contests. Meanwhile, Graham was recognized early for his prodigious math skills and entrepreneurial flair, impressing teachers and forging contacts in small business competitions. In their final year, they were co-captains of the debate team, ironically presenting united fronts in competition, but privately they'd grown a bit distant. Leonard bemoaned the intangible nature of big business, while Graham insisted that to truly make an impact, money was an essential tool. Despite the slight tension, they remained close friends. When college acceptances rolled around, Leonard chose a liberal arts path at a mid-range university with a decent writing program, while Graham gained admission into a top-tier business school with partial scholarships. They stood side by side at high school graduation, hugging in front of cameras. Each insisted they'd keep in touch. "We'll see each other on breaks," Graham said, clapping Leonard's shoulder. "And I'll read your novel when you publish it. Just promise not to forget me when you're famous." Leonard laughed, promising the same. The first few years of college, they stayed moderately connected, exchanging sporadic calls. Graham soared in the business environment, wowing professors, nabbing an internship at a financial startup. His confidence amplified. He joined a fraternity, networked with future moguls, wrote business plans for hypothetical ventures that garnered praise. Leonard, in contrast, found his writing talents blossoming but faced financial strain. His scholarships covered tuition, but living expenses were a constant worry. He worked part-time at a bookstore, scraped by on cheap groceries, and typed short stories in the campus library at odd hours. He loved creative expression, but discovered quickly that being a writer rarely spelled easy income. After college, the contrast between their lives sharpened. Graham accepted an analyst position at a major investment firm in the city, quickly climbing ranks. Before long, he was wearing tailored suits, partying in trendy bars with colleagues, and harboring ambitions to launch his own hedge fund one day. Leonard, meanwhile, floundered. He published a few short pieces in literary journals, but the pay was minimal. He lived in a cramped apartment with 2 roommates, hopped from one part-time job to another, all while laboring late into the night on a half-finished novel. Every so often, he'd send Graham texts, "Hey man, how's life in the big city?" But Graham, busy or uninterested, would often reply days later with short, polite messages. When they did meet, usually on the rare holiday visits back home, an awkward gulf lingered between them. Graham's success soared. He boasted about bonuses, about joining an exclusive gym, about the fancy new condo he was eyeing. Leonard would smile, trying not to let envy or embarrassment show. He'd talk about a new short story project, a possible agent interest, but deep down he worried he'd never break through. They parted ways with polite handshakes. The years rolled on. Leonard turned 30, still living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to finish that elusive novel. Graham, on the other hand, managed a major career coup, leaving his firm and co-founding a boutique investment company, Turner & Associates, which soared in profitability. He quickly gained a reputation as a finance whiz. Magazines praised him as an up-and-coming star. He moved into a luxurious apartment, drove a sports car, traveled internationally to woo wealthy clients. During that time, Leonard's fortunes bottomed out. His father fell ill. He returned to their hometown for a while to help, draining what meager savings he had. The novel remained incomplete. Potential publishing leads fizzled. He wrote freelance articles for minimal pay. He tried applying for stable office jobs, but lacked relevant corporate experience. By the time his father recovered, Leonard was behind on rent, forced to couch surf with acquaintances. Feeling out of options, Leonard swallowed his pride. He reached out to Graham, who was by then widely known in their circle as the friend who made it big. Over a phone call, Leonard confessed his dire circumstances. No stable housing, no job prospects, credit card debt piling up. He needed help, perhaps a small loan or a short-term place to crash. He recalled how, in their youth, Graham had once said, "We'll always have each other's backs, no matter what." They arranged to meet in Graham City, in a stylish cafe near Graham's high-rise office. Leonard arrived early, fiddling with the pages of an old story draft, mind racing with anxious thoughts. Would Graham be sympathetic? Even a short-term loan might rescue him from complete ruin. Graham swept in wearing an impeccably tailored navy suit, hair slicked, an expensive watch glinting on his wrist. His cologne announced him before he even reached the table. He greeted Leonard with a half-smile. "Long time," he said, setting down his phone. It's been a while, huh?" Leonard forced a weak grin. He wore a threadbare jacket, the same scuffed boots from years back. "It has. Thanks for meeting me, Graham. I know your schedule must be packed." Graham waved it off. "Hey, no worries. Good to see you," he said, though his tone sounded polite rather than warm. A waitress came by, and he promptly ordered a latte and a croissant. Leonard, pockets empty, just asked for water. When the waitress left, Leonard steeled himself. "I'll cut to the chase. I'm in trouble. Work has been sporadic. I fell behind on rent while helping my dad. Now, I'm basically homeless. I was hoping you might loan me enough to get back on my feet. Maybe $1,000 or $2,000, so I can secure a small place and cover job hunting expenses. I swear I'll pay you back once I land something stable." Graham listened, face inscrutable. He tapped his watch, avoided eye contact. "Wow, that's quite a predicament," he said at last. "I'm sorry you're in this spot. But, I've got my own financial commitments. My business is expanding. I'm investing a lot of capital. It's not like I have spare liquid funds lying around. Even if I did, mixing money with old friendships can get messy. It rarely ends well." Leonard's chest constricted. He forced calm. "I understand the risk. But you know me. I'd never cheat you. We go way back. You're the only person I trust to ask. I'd sign a note, keep track of it, whatever's needed, just to get me stable." Graham sipped his latte, then sighed. "I wish I could do something. But the firm's finances are complicated. My personal money is tied up in investments. Honestly, I can't just hand out thousands. It sets a bad precedent." Leonard's mouth went dry. "So you can't spare even $1,000? You're driving a brand new sports car. You bought a condo last year." That comment made Graham stiffen. "Look, I worked my ass off for what I have. I didn't luck into it. I can't just give handouts. People see me as a meal ticket, but they don't know the pressure I'm under. We're not kids in a treehouse anymore, Leonard. This is real life." Leonard stared down at his half-empty glass of water. Anger and shame swirled. He'd never begged like this before. "I get it's real life," he said quietly. "I'm not asking for a free ride. I'm asking for a friend's help." The tension hung thick. Graham exhaled, feigning regret. "I'm sorry. I can't solve your financial problems. Maybe you should consider a more practical career path. Or talk to relatives. I'm sure something will come up for you." Leonard swallowed a bitter taste. Realizing further pleas would only humiliate him more, he nodded slowly. "Right. Thanks for your time." They parted with a forced handshake. Graham offered a half-hearted, "Hope you land on your feet," but the words fell hollow. Leonard left the cafe, tears burning at the corners of his eyes. He'd thought old friendship might override wealth's arrogance, but he was mistaken. In the weeks that followed, Leonard scrambled. He found a short stay at a friend of a friend's couch. He took on menial side gigs, delivering groceries, dog walking, anything that paid. Meanwhile, he tried applying for stable editorial or communications roles, though competition was fierce. At night, he kept plugging away at his novel, ironically fueled by heartbreak and desperation. In a battered spiral notebook, he poured out raw emotions of betrayal and longing. He wrote more ferociously than ever, possibly producing some of his best work. Meanwhile, Graham soared. He closed a major deal with a wealthy investor, netting a handsome bonus for his firm. He traveled to conferences in Europe, stayed in five-star hotels, posted gleaming snapshots on social media. People from his circle lauded him as a self-made success. On the surface, he was unstoppable. Yet behind the veneer, subtle cracks emerged. Graham's lavish lifestyle outpaced his actual profits. Some deals carried hidden risks. One of his largest clients gambled heavily in speculative markets. Graham confidently believed the bull market would never end. He sank large sums of the firm's money into expansions, certain that tomorrow's gains would cover today's expenses. A few cautious voices within the firm tried warning him about overleverage, but he brushed them off. "Fortune favors the bold," he insisted. Then, in a swift turn reminiscent of so many market cautionary tales, a sudden economic downturn rippled through the finance world. Stocks tumbled. Some of Graham's speculative investments plummeted in value. The large client he'd relied on faced an unexpected liquidity crisis, defaulting on obligations. In a matter of weeks, a chain reaction threatened to topple Graham's carefully constructed empire. Margins were called in. Lenders demanded collateral. He found himself hustling day and night, patching holes in a sinking ship. His once lavish lifestyle ground to a halt. Without that main client's capital, his firm lacked the liquidity to maintain high leverage. Employees grew anxious. Some started quitting, fearing collapse. Rumors spread that Turner & Associates was teetering on bankruptcy. Graham tried injecting his personal funds, but they were dwarfed by the magnitude of the shortfall. His condo's value had decreased in the buyer's market, meaning a sale wouldn't fetch enough to solve his problems. Over the course of mere months, Graham realized he was in dire straits. He delayed telling friends or family, hoping for a last-minute miracle. But the day came when even paying his staff salaries was impossible. A meltdown followed. Clients withdrew accounts. Lenders threatened lawsuits. By year's end, Turner & Associates declared insolvency. Graham's personal finances were deeply entangled. He faced a swirl of claims, debts, and legal entanglements. During that downfall, he didn't speak to Leonard, partly out of shame, partly out of pride. He kept hoping to fix everything, to reemerge triumphant. Instead, each day brought fresh humiliations. Repossession notices for his leased sports car, demands from the bank regarding his condo's mortgage, mounting legal fees. Soon, he had no choice but to vacate his luxurious apartment. With nowhere else to turn, Graham returned to his parents' house in the outskirts of the same city, occupying his old bedroom with childhood posters still on the walls. In that forced stillness, as he stared at a dusty soccer trophy from high school, Graham realized how ephemeral his success had been. He recalled the moment Leonard had asked for help, and how he'd refused. Now he was the one facing an uncertain future. The irony stung, but he had no illusions that Leonard would rescue him. He had burned that bridge, humiliating his friend. While Graham's life disintegrated, Leonard experienced a small, steady upswing. Through determined job hunting, he landed a part-time editorial assistant position at a small publishing house. The pay was modest, but it provided stability, and one of the editors saw promise in Leonard's writing. Encouraged, Leonard shared a few chapters of his novel. The editor offered feedback, praising the emotional depth. Leonard poured his evenings into revisions. Over months, he refined the manuscript, weaving in his experiences of financial ruin, heartbreak, and persistent hope. The editor, impressed, pitched it to the house's acquisitions team. Leonard braced for another rejection. He was used to them. To his astonishment, they offered him a modest publishing contract. The terms weren't huge, but it was a real deal. Leonard nearly broke down in tears when he signed. For the first time in forever, a dream felt tangible. His novel, titled Between Dusk and Dawn, hit shelves quietly, but the publisher's marketing team managed a decent push. Early reviews were warm. A well-known online reviewer praised its raw authenticity in depicting a man's struggle to retain dignity amid financial adversity. Word of mouth spread. Within 6 months, the novel garnered a cult following. Leonard found himself invited to small bookstore events, local literary panels. He wasn't raking in massive royalties yet, but the momentum was building. More importantly, he had a new sense of purpose and a stable enough income from the editorial job to rent a small studio apartment. Then the big break. A notable literary blogger championed Between Dusk and Dawn as a must-read. Its online sales spiked. A major newspaper ran a piece featuring up-and-coming authors, including Leonard. Suddenly, the publisher arranged a bigger print run. Leonard was interviewed by local radio. He received an email from a film producer curious about adaptation rights. The whirlwind overwhelmed him, but also affirmed all the nights he'd nearly given up. In the midst of this success, an old memory gnawed at Leonard. The day he'd humbly asked Graham for help and been refused. He wondered if Graham was still riding high or if fate had turned. On a whim, Leonard searched online for news about Turner and Associates. He found articles describing its collapse, referencing legal battles. He saw a photo of Graham looking pale as he exited a courthouse. The article described lawsuits from creditors, staff layoffs, total meltdown. Leonard felt a pang of shock, then empathy. Despite everything, they'd been friends once. He decided to reach out, not with malice, but with genuine concern. He texted the old phone number. "Hey Graham, it's Leonard. I heard about Tanda. Are you okay?" No response for days. Leonard figured the number might be defunct. Or maybe Graham was ignoring him. A week later, late at night, Leonard's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Leonard, it's Graham. Lost my phone. Sorry for ignoring. Life's rough. Don't even know where to start." Leonard replied gently, "I'm sorry. Let's talk if you want." He half expected Graham to blow him off, but minutes later, Graham requested a call. They spoke for hours. Graham's voice was subdued, full of regrets. He recounted the downfall, bad investments, sudden downturn. He'd been forced to move in with his parents, job prospects bleak because of the scandal around his firm's collapse. There was a moment of pregnant silence on the line. Then Graham said, voice trembling, "Look, I know I was a jerk. I can't undo that. I guess I'm calling because I realized I have no real friends left. Everyone vanished when the money did. Except you reached out. I don't even deserve it." Leonard closed his eyes, recalling the sting of that cafe meeting. "We have history," he replied softly. "I was hurt, but I can't forget we were once best friends. And anyway, it's not my place to hold a grudge forever. Are you doing okay physically? Mentally?" Graham sighed. "Not great. I'm depressed, humiliated. My parents are kind, but they're struggling themselves. I need a job, but nobody wants me with these lawsuits pending." Leonard's heart ached. "I'm so sorry." He paused, uncertain. "Look, I don't have huge resources, but my novel's doing decently, and I have a stable editorial job. I might be able to help. Or, at least we can brainstorm. Is there a line of work you can pivot to?" Graham exhaled in disbelief. "You'd help me after I turned you down?" "Why?" Leonard managed a sad smile. "Because I know how it feels to be desperate. And we once swore we'd never abandon each other." Over the following days, they continued talking. Leonard offered a listening ear. He even introduced Graham to someone he knew, one of the local bookstore owners who needed a part-time accountant to handle the store's finances. It was a small lead, hardly glamorous for someone who once managed millions, but it was a foot in the door. Graham, swallowing pride, applied. The store owner recognized Graham's skill with numbers, hired him for a modest wage. It was better than nothing. That small step, ironically, was enough to let Graham begin rebuilding. He moved from his parents' place to a cheap shared apartment, budgeting carefully. At first, the bookstore job felt humbling. He went from closing deals with millionaires to reconciling daily sales of paperback novels. But the store's atmosphere was friendly. Over time, he began to appreciate simpler interactions, forging a camaraderie with the staff. He even found a stray sense of purpose in helping the store manage inventory and negotiate better terms with suppliers. The store's finances improved under his watch, and the owner praised him openly. One day, the store owner introduced Graham to a friend who ran a small consulting firm for local businesses. That friend needed someone adept at financial planning. Graham interviewed, got an offer for a slightly better salary. He took it, continuing the slow climb out of ruin. Freed from the constant high-stakes environment, he found his stress less overwhelming. He realized that, ironically, losing everything had forced him to experience humility, empathy, and a sense of community. Throughout this period, Leonard's star kept rising. His novels sold steadily, eventually landing on a regional bestseller list. A mid-level film studio acquired the adaptation rights, providing Leonard with an unexpected windfall of money. Grateful, he paid off debts, improved his living situation, and even indulged in a used but decent car. He remained modest. Memories of poverty kept him grounded. He also continued working part-time at the publisher, wanting a stable anchor while he wrote a second manuscript. Leonard and Graham reconnected more concretely. They had lunches together, reminiscing about old times. It was as though the roles had reversed. Leonard was the one who could afford to treat Graham to a meal, though he did so tactfully, never making Graham feel lesser. They had heart-to-heart conversations about the illusions of success, how money could warp relationships. One autumn afternoon, they sat on a park bench, the crisp air rustling leaves around them. Graham looked at Leonard with earnest eyes. "There's something I need to say," he began, voice laden with regret. "I truly am sorry for that day in the cafe. I was so wrapped up in my own ego, I forgot what mattered. You were a friend in need, and I let you down. I still cringe thinking about it." Leonard studied the trees swaying overhead. "I won't lie, it hurt. But seeing you now, I realize you've changed. You're not that arrogant guy anymore. Or, at least you're trying not to be." Graham managed a rueful chuckle. "Life reversed on me in the most brutal way. I guess it was karma. But maybe it was also a blessing in disguise. Made me see I'd become a jerk." He paused. "If you hadn't called me, I'd probably still be sulking, blaming everyone else. Thank you for giving me a second chance. I promise, if you ever need help again, I'll be there." Leonard patted Graham's shoulder. "We're older now, maybe a bit wiser. Let's just do better by each other. That's all." In that moment, the scars of the past gave way to a gentle reconciliation. They felt the old warmth, the ghost of teenage camaraderie in the treehouse, no longer overshadowed by the illusions of wealth or success. Over the next year, Leonard's second novel was published, garnering positive reviews. He steadily built a reputation in literary circles. Meanwhile, Graham advanced in the local consulting firm, eventually heading a division that specialized in small business financial solutions, helping others avoid the pitfalls he'd fallen into. Their lives, once marred by a painful mismatch of fortunes, settled into a healthier equilibrium. One day, Leonard received a letter from a prominent literary award committee, naming his second novel a finalist. With it came an invitation to a gala ceremony in the city. Overwhelmed, he invited Graham to join him. The night of the ceremony, both men donned suits, Leonard in a tasteful but modest one, Graham in a simple business suit. They arrived at the grand event, rubbing shoulders with authors, critics, and publishers. The atmosphere shimmered with possibility. At one point, a well-known columnist approached Leonard, praising his heartfelt narratives. She asked about his inspirations. Leonard, glancing sideways at Graham, answered honestly, "My life, my struggles, and the friends who shaped me. A big part of me writes to capture how relationships can break and mend under financial pressure." The columnist typed furiously on her phone, enthralled. Later, after the ceremony ended, Leonard didn't win the top prize, but earned an honorable mention. The two men stepped onto the sidewalk under a starry sky. They laughed about the glitz of the event, how surreal it was. Then they strolled a few blocks in comfortable silence until they found a quiet cafe. Sitting inside, sipping hot chocolate, they reflected on the improbable journey from teenage dreams to heartbreak to unexpected renewal. Graham said softly, "If someone told me 2 years ago that I'd be a mid-level manager and you'd be an acclaimed author, I'd have scoffed. But life reversed on us, didn't it?" Leonard nodded. "But maybe it's how it was meant to be. I used to resent never having money. But now I'm grateful for the perspective it gave me. And you, well, you had to tumble to see the real cost of arrogance." Graham exhaled, eyes watery with emotion. "I lost everything. But I found something more important, humility, and a friend who didn't abandon me." He met Leonard's gaze. "I vow never to let money or pride blind me again. If in the future you or anyone else needs help, I want to be the person who says yes." Leonard gently smiled. "Me too." They clinked their mugs, a quiet toast to second chances. In the months that followed, they solidified a new, healthier friendship. Sometimes they collaborated. Leonard wrote an article about small businesses, quoting Graham's insights. Graham connected Leonard with a local philanthropic group that supported literacy programs. Leonard ended up volunteering at a writing workshop for underprivileged teens. Both men saw how synergy outshone selfishness. When Leonard's mother fell ill, thankfully only briefly, Graham was the first to call, offering any assistance he could give. He drove Leonard to the hospital, waited with him, demonstrating compassion that once seemed unimaginable. Meanwhile, Leonard dedicated a short story to Graham, capturing their evolving bond. Throughout the city, anyone who knew them marveled at the unusual pair, the once rich man who fell from grace but found redemption, and the struggling writer who rose from hardship, forging a new career. They were living proof that fortune can flip, that kindness might be the only real safety net we have for each other. A year later, on a sunny Saturday, Leonard hosted a small backyard gathering at his newly purchased modest home, financed partially by that film adaptation deal. The yard was simple, some potted plants, a rickety wooden table, an old grill Ethan from next door had sold him. But it was more than Leonard ever dreamed he'd own. He invited close friends, a few publishing colleagues, and, of course, Graham. The highlight came when Graham stepped up with a grin and handed Leonard a gift, a leather-bound notebook, the first page inscribed with "For old dreams, new stories, and the road we walk together." Leonard laughed, hugging Graham. "You remembered how we used to scribble plans in battered notebooks in the treehouse," he said, voice thick with emotion. Graham nodded. "Yeah. Well, I'm not sure we planned for everything, but I guess we learned." The guests toasted. A light breeze carried laughter across the lawn. Leonard looked around, heart brimming. He recalled the moment he'd sat in that cafe, desperate and humiliated, only to be rejected by Graham. He pictured Graham's lofty condo, the wealth that seemed permanent. Now everything had changed, but the moral was obvious. Success can be fleeting, and true friendship lies in supporting each other when times are dark. After the party, as the sun dipped low, Graham lingered, helping pick up plastic cups and plates. Leonard stacked them in the trash, shaking his head in disbelief at how life had reversed. "Remember that day we parted in that cafe?" Leonard asked, voice quiet. "I never imagined we'd stand here, you picking up trash in my backyard after I host a celebration. It's wild." Graham exhaled a small chuckle. "It is. But I prefer this version of us, where we're not lost in illusions. We've both found more honest paths." He paused. "I do regret hurting you. I hope you know that." Leonard set a hand on Graham's shoulder. I forgave you long ago, and you've more than repaid me with genuine support now. Let's keep building forward." They gazed at the sky, purpling with dusk. The hum of cicadas rose, mixing with the hush of suburban evening. A sense of peace settled between them, a quiet gratitude for the storms they'd weathered and the humility that anchored them now. In the final accounting of their story, no one soared to billionaire status or commanded red carpet fame. Instead, they found meaningful, balanced lives. Leonard continued writing. His second novel garnered steady sales. A film adaptation was in pre-production. Graham built a modest but respected career assisting small businesses, occasionally dabbling in safer investments with a conscientious approach. They discovered that chasing ephemeral wealth or disregarding loyalty only leads to emptiness. When either encountered struggling friends or acquaintances, they offered the empathy and assistance they once withheld or craved. They took to heart the lesson that life can reverse fortunes abruptly, and all we truly own is how we treat each other. Over and over, they recounted their tale to younger folks. How a rich man once refused to help his struggling friend. Then life reversed, forging a moral of humility and mutual support. Their message resonated. Be kind, for tomorrow you might be the one needing kindness. In the end, that was the powerful moral. Wealth and success can vanish like smoke, but a compassionate spirit endures. Friendship, tested by adversity, can mend itself and produce deeper bonds than any fleeting material gain. And for Leonard and Graham, living that moral each day was the real success story.